We now get to the key feature of V8 that has to do with the very existence of Node.js, adding features to JavaScript. If I go back to the V8 homepage, there was a fourth bullet point, that V8 can run standalone. That is, it can just be its own program that just takes JavaScript code, the text that I write, and does all the work to make sure it's valid and everything else, and then convert it into machine code. Or it can be embedded into any C++ application. Now here's the cool part. Here's the part that takes us down the road toward Node.js. If I click this embedded link, we see there's actually an entire embedder's guide for V8. That is, if you're writing a C++ program, you can put V8 inside your C++ program and use it. You could write a C++ program where others can write JavaScript, and your C++ program can take that JavaScript and run it through V8. But there's more than that. V8 has hooks that I can use in my C++ program. So we already know that I write JavaScript code, it's text, it gets passed to the V8 engine, which is a C++ program, and V8 ultimately in some way creates for me machine code, code that will run on the processor. But I can also embed V8 into my own C++ program, so that JavaScript code still gets run through V8. It still works to generate that machine code. But because I'm also writing in C++, the same language V8 is written in, there are hooks that I can use to add features to JavaScript. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, V8 is just C++, and it's taking JavaScript and doing things with it, interpreting it, compiling it. And so V8 allows me to write my own C++ code that I can make available to JavaScript. In other words, I can make it so that if someone writes something in particular in their JavaScript code, that will cause my C++ code to be run. This means that I can essentially add features to JavaScript by embedding V8 into my C++ program, and so my C++ program will read and understand more than what the ECMAScript standard specifies that JavaScript should understand. This is extraordinarily powerful because C++ has far more features than JavaScript as a programming language. JavaScript was designed to be in the browser. It wasn't designed to deal with lower-level operations like dealing with files and folders that are sitting on your hard drive or connecting directly to a database. C++ was designed to do that. It was designed closer to the machine. So that means I can write things in C++ that JavaScript doesn't have, and make anything that I can do in C++ available to my JavaScript code. All right, let's see an example that comes along for the ride when you download V8's code. All right, for this part, I'm going to open something that comes along with the V8 source code. It's some C++ code of its own. I'm going to open it here in Microsoft Visual Studio Community Edition. Now, this only runs on Windows. You do not have to do this. Don't worry. I just want to show this to you. I think you'll enjoy understanding this, and it will be very helpful for later in the course. Now, this is C++ code, a C++ program that runs in the command line called shell. It is not V8. It's just a little program. But notice the first line of the C++ program. It actually is embedding or using V8, the entire engine within itself. And then it's going to use this embed to add some features to JavaScript. First of all, let me just run this little shell program. I'll use the command line. I went to the folder where the program has been compiled, and I can run it. And I just type shell. And I see that it outputs for me what version of V8 it's using. And then I can write some JavaScript. And what this little C++ program does is take the text that I type, give it to V8, and then output whatever V8 gives back. So I set a variable, nothing comes back. But if I say A now, I see the 1. See what happened there? I have a little C++ program that lets me type some text, and it passes it to the JavaScript engine, to V8, and then prints whatever V8 gives back. So I've embedded V8 inside a program that does more than what V8 does, as far as wrapping what V8 does and adding some features to it. But I haven't yet added a feature to JavaScript itself. I'm just using V8. Oh, by the way, here's something interesting. You know how we've been saying that V8 takes your JavaScript code, the text you write, and converts it into machine code that the processor can understand? This shell program has an argument called print_code that I can pass to it so that when I write my JavaScript code, it will show me the machine code that V8 generates. So let's prove this is what V8 is doing. I'll say var a equals 1, a very simple line of JavaScript. When I hit enter, look at all that. I can scroll back up and see that V8 took my raw JavaScript source code and then generated all this machine code specific to my computer's processor. So depending on where you install this, you'd see different instruction sets. So I can hit some JavaScript, write a line of JavaScript. I can say 1 + 1 and get out 2, but in between there I can see all the machine code that was necessary in order to actually run, to actually execute these instructions. So we can see just how far away from what's really happening we're abstracted when we're writing in a language like JavaScript, and just how much work an engine like V8 is doing for us. And it's here free of charge for us to use. That's pretty amazing. All right, so let's cancel that. I'll say CLS to clear my screen. Here, my command line. Let's take a look at some things that exist here. We'll look at two things in particular. If I scroll down, there's a few functions, C++ functions of interest: print, read, load, quit, and version. These are functions that were written inside this little C++ program. But notice that if I scroll down a little ways, I can see that V8 is being used in my C++ program. And something very interesting happens down here. What happens is that we're binding my C++ functions to statements or words or keywords that V8 will look for. So there's no such thing as a print keyword in JavaScript. If you look at the ECMAScript specification, there's no print keyword. There's also nothing called load in JavaScript. But I've written here, or has been provided to me in this case, some C++ code that prints values to the command line and that reads a file. Remember, JavaScript has no means to read a file, but C++ does. And then I'm binding this phrase to my C++ function. In other words, I'm saying to V8, when you see this in JavaScript code, actually run this code that I've specified over here off to the side. Not within yourself, V8, but I've given you some C++ code that you can use. And of course, C++ is converted to machine code as well, so everything is machine code eventually. But while V8 is running and processing the JavaScript code I give it, if it sees this, even though it's not part of the ECMAScript specification, even though it's not part of V8 itself, what it sees as normal JavaScript, V8 allows me to add on features by simply writing the feature in C++ and telling V8 how to call the feature in JavaScript, what JavaScript should look like when that feature is being called. So when I see print, it's actually going to go out and run this C++ print function, and the same thing with loading the file. Let's try that. I'm going to go ahead and run my little C++ program called shell. And remember, it recognizes normal JavaScript because it runs it through the V8 engine. And normally, if I put print, JavaScript would error because there is no such thing as the print keyword. V8 would be unaware of it. But I've embedded V8. So I'm actually sending this code to my C++ program, which then is sending it to V8. And in my C++ program, I've defined a print function. And I've told V8, when you see the phrase print in a JavaScript program, please run the C++ code that I've written over here. And so, that's valid JavaScript. I've just wrote a line of JavaScript that is invalid according to the specification. That shouldn't exist. But V8 let me add this feature to JavaScript. Because V8 is just C++. It looks at the JavaScript, it sees the phrase, and since I've also written some C++ code and told V8 about it, it knows what to do. That's pretty cool, right? I can even load a file. Here, I created a little file called app.js. I set two variables, added them together, and then used the print statement to output them. The load function lets me pass a string to it, the string being my file name. This load function does not exist in JavaScript. This should be an error normally. But I've added it. I've told V8, here's an extra feature that I would like to add to JavaScript, please. And V8 lets me do that. So when I run it, it prints 3. It loaded this entire file, which itself is something that JavaScript can't do. So the ability to load a file was given to JavaScript. And then it printed it, which is something that JavaScript normally can't do, and it did that as well. So we've attached C++ code to our own custom JavaScript keywords. Think about that for a second. You could just keep expanding JavaScript with whatever features you could think of that you could write in C++, which is a lot because C++ is closer to the machine. It's a feature-filled programming language. All right, you get that? What about if we try adding our own little feature? Okay, in just a couple of minutes, and I skipped that part for you, I added a simple new feature. I added a C++ function called greet that just outputs hi from Tony and then a carriage return. And then I made sure to make that available to JavaScript by giving it a keyword, a new function to V8, saying if you see the word greet, then call my C++ program. Then when I built this, let's go back to my shell, run the shell, and I'll just say greet, and it's a function. So I'll put parentheses, hit enter, and there it is. Now I didn't define this function in JavaScript. This is now natively available to any JavaScript that I run through my shell program. I've added this feature to JavaScript. All right, so we have an understanding, we've seen that V8 is designed so that we can embed it in other C++ programs and therefore make features, make things that we can do in C++ available to JavaScript, available to be able to be invoked or called through JavaScript. I can essentially add features. This is what Node.js is. Node.js is a C++ program with V8 embedded that has added a wealth of great features that make it suitable to be a server technology. So what does that all mean? What are some of these things that Node.js has added? And how can we use it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the course. Let's move on.